Well, today the world is celebrating the International Women's Day, and here at Africanews we're also doing the same. Women's labor and contribution continues to be undervalued, and it is not accorded the same gravitas as men. Now, ahead of the International Women's Day, which is now today, the United Nations Human Rights Office, the African Union, and the United Nations Women released a report into women's rights in Africa. That was yesterday. Now, according to the report, there have been significant improvements in realizing women's rights in the continent. For instance, female participation in African legislative processes surpasses that of many developed countries across the globe. But in every country in the continent, as around the world, women continued to be denied full enjoyment of their rights. For instance, in 6 African countries, there is no legal protection for women against domestic violence.
In another report, UNESCO presents figures that show the crucial problems in the educational systems of certain countries on the continent. In the DRC, for example, 10% of girls will never go to school, 27% abandoned their studies, and 63% will begin their studies late. In Niger, we note a big difference between the sexes. 91% of girls will never go to school, 3% abandon their studies, and 6% will start late, against 83%, 4%, and 12% for boys. Still, according to UNESCO, if all women finish their primary school studies, the maternal mortality would be reduced by 70%. That would save nearly 50,000 lives. These figures, which should obviously be modified, reflects a not-so-bright future for women and girls' rights in Africa. We speak this morning to Mahawa Kabawila, the African Union Director for Women, Gender and Development, who joins us from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Are women and girls in Africa better off in 2017?
I think we are seeking to improve the conditions of women. The midterm evaluation of the Millennium Development Goals highlighted areas where we made progress, for example, almost closing the gender gap at enrollment in primary levels, but the gap is still quite wide in terms of secondary education, for example. Africa is still behind and has the highest rate of maternal mortality. We have issues of child marriage, which is the highest in Africa as well. So there needs to be more work done. Indeed, there's lots of knowledge products around, but we will not cease to really emphasize the importance of continuously advocating for improvements of the lives and livelihoods of women on the continent. And what better way to do that than reports that do speak to the reality, and then which will be followed up by, and again, mobilize support for more concrete actions.
We have had many frameworks by the African Union to promote the rights of women and children, but many African countries have not ratified, let alone implement them. A classic example is the Maputo Protocol, where only 38 out of 55 countries are now state parties. Would you say your advocacy has been effective?
I would like to say that it's really a process to ratify the instruments, but also implementation. And like with anything touching the lives of women and girls, it's a matter of development imperative. When women ask for water, water is essential to the lives and livelihoods of all citizens. So when women ask for their rights to be protected, the country has to be able to put in place mechanism that protects those specific rights. It requires decisions, it requires investments, it requires resources. And we were very pleased to note that over the last 2 years that the African Union dedicated its theme to women, that 30 member states reported legislative actions that took place in their countries to fast-track implementation of those commitments.
And today women are being told to be bold for change. Is it long over, and why is it taking decades to see this change in gender equality, in your opinion?
We would, of course, like these things happen much faster, but we also need to put it into context. Africa is leading in a number of areas. We need to celebrate that. I was speaking once with some people who were remarking on the number of, for example, ministers of foreign affairs in Africa compared to other parts of the world, or women ambassadors, or women in parliament, for example. The AFDB, in one of their reports, stated that Africa had the largest number of women in boardrooms than any other continent. So there is progress. However, we would like to see it happen much faster, and especially in key areas which touch on the dignity, the basic human rights of women. We would like to see the gender gap close before the 180 years that have been predicted by the World Economic Forum. The African Union has set a target of 2063. We would like to see it happen before then. And we will continue, however, to celebrate the small gains, but also push for bigger ones.
Thank you very much, Madam Mahawa. That was Mahawa Kaba-Wheeler with the African Union Women Development and Gender Program.